Good evening, good morning, wherever you are in the world. Thanks for tuning in to The Fact Is with Hollis Grant. I'm your host, Hollis Grant. We're doing a look at Saul Alinsky. And in the last episode, we were talking about the rules for radicals and going over the 13 rules. We got over Rule 1 and Rule 2. We'll just jump right into it today and get into Rule number 3 and number 4. So just to recap, Rule 1, power is not only what you have, but what the enemy thinks you have. Rule number 2, never go outside the expertise of your people. So let's just jump right into rule number 3, shall we? Whenever possible, go outside the expertise of the enemy. Now, last episode, we were talking about the language that's used by politicians. And we talked about the language of enemy and using those terms as enemies. You have to really wonder why an individual would want to say they're an enemy. Such a strong, hateful word. Not an opponent. Opponent would be such a nicer word because we can agree to disagree and have the best interest of people at heart. But remember, we're dealing with Saul Alinsky, and we're going back to what was said and I'll quote the epitaph again, he loved to play the game. It's all a game. Politics is a game for some people, and that's all it is for this individual. It was a game. So let's take a look and understand that terminology when we say the word enemy. It's defined one that is antagonistic to another. So one seeking to injure, to overthrow, or to confound an opponent. Something harmful or deadly. A military adversary, a hostile unit of force. These are nice terminologies. You wouldn't want to say to somebody that they're an enemy. My cat's an enemy. He's constantly waging war against my feet in the middle of the night, and anyone that does have a cat will understand that they'll attack your feet. They'll see your toes as an enemy. But when you're talking about governance and how to conduct yourself as a politician, living by a set of morals and codes, and to try to find a healthy solution so that human civilization can progress and prosper. If that's really what it's all about, is that everyone just lives happily. And when you're creating rules and laws, making sure that everyone's treated fairly and justly, and I'm sure that everyone would agree to that. Republican or Democrat, conservative or liberal, they'll all agree that it's just about trying to survive and being equal. But is it really about equality? Or is it about power with some people? Because when you use terms such as enemy, one that is antagonistic to another, one seeking to injure, to overthrow, or confound an opponent. Overthrow your opposition, overthrow everything that's built upon today's society when we're looking at order and law and order. Because the rules for radicals in that movement that grew out of the 60s, grew out of the hippies, peace and love and equality. These aren't ideas that Saul Alinsky had. They were ideas that go back in the movement of peace and love and equality, has its roots in other organizations. We'll discuss those. We'll talk about their impact on Saul Alinsky and the way that it is today. See, the 60s was all about social change and social movement getting into America, talking about equality, the civil rights movement, all of which that anybody would agree are great things and is a great progress to go through. Martin Luther King. And you have these people that have gone through and forged a new society based on equality and fairness and judging man by his character and not the color of his skin, and anybody will agree to that, and I would agree to that, and I think that anyone that doesn't agree with that is not worthy enough to live in our society today. Because it doesn't matter about what somebody looks like, it doesn't matter about their appearance. It's the content of their character and what they bring towards society and the good in society. But not for some people, not for people that follow the rules for radicals and talk about organization and classification of people, because when you go back and you talk about equality and the civil rights movement and you talk about everyone is judged by the character of the content of their character and not by their appearance, that goes against the grain of everything that was taught in the rules for radicals when you're talking about organization, classification. We touched on that last episode where we talked about classification and getting into organizing at the grassroots level, organizing and putting people into their places and putting people into their little cliques, labeling people to organize. So that's what you have to think about when you're using the terms of enemy, organization. It's not about equality. It's about putting each person again into their particular individual place. Getting back to rule number 3, when we talk about whenever possible, go outside the expertise of your enemy. Listen anytime that you see any politician bring up an expert, a doctor to validate their claims, a scientist to validate their findings and their studies, and listen to what they say. In fact, I would challenge anyone to read any of their research and take a look, because the people and the scientists, the doctors, they're chosen. They're chosen for their views. They're chosen for their findings because they want to control, and you want to control the experience. You want to control the conversation. And whenever you can, you always have to go outside the expertise of the enemy. Understand what the context is, and we'll talk about the Green New Deal. And anytime that you talk about the Green New Deal, you always want to, if you're a Democrat, you want to go after the Republicans and talk about things that their scientists aren't talking about. It's all about creating the illusion. It goes back to power is not only what you have, but what the enemy thinks you have. Creating the illusion, always going through and looking at the expertise of the enemy. Rule number 4, make the enemy live up to its own book of rules. That's quite evident in today. When you look at Republicans and conservatives, one of the common themes that you will see, that any Democrat will see and any liberal person, liberalism prides itself on being agnostic or atheist. It's almost become a religion unto itself. You want to talk about not holding to a higher power. You always want to treat people with equality. So whenever you can, you want to label people on the quote-unquote right, conservative, Republican, and you want to label them, and you want to slap a label as a Christian. You want to slap them as religious. Because when you slap a label on somebody, organization, organize, they now have to justify that their actions live up to their moral and ethical standards. If you call somebody a Christian, then they would have to do something that would be the Christian equivalent of. Make them and hold them accountable for every action that they do, because they can't go against your morals. Once you have rules, you can't break a rule, no matter what. So you'll always see that Democrats, liberals, really don't stand for anything. They'll never pick a side, stand on the moral high ground, or say, that's wrong. We shouldn't do that. And there's many, many examples that we can dive into and look at the debauchery of society today. We can look at the acceptability of prostitution throughout the world. We can look at the accessibility of pornography. The loose moral standards that we have today as a society, because you can't have a Republican or a conservative stand up to those values. You're holding them against them. When you give somebody a label and put a rule on them that they can't go against that moral, ethical standard, you can break that person down. And that's what it's all about, is making the enemy accountable to a rule. And that's not right. I don't agree with it. I think it's completely disgusting. Because when you're dealing in the world of politics, it really is to represent the people. And you can't force change. You can't force people to accept a lifestyle that they don't want. And the majority of people just want to wake up, go to work, come home, turn on the TV, and have a roof over their head. And that's all that most people want. But not for the snake oil salesmen, the politicians, where it's all about money. It's about lining their own pockets, creating contracts, getting rich, about power, perceived power. But when you start looking at society and understanding that it really doesn't mean anything, we all have the same ending anyway. Rich or poor, it's all going to end the same, and we can't take what we make when we go. But the perception of power. Make the enemy live up to its own book of rules. And you'll never have to live up to any rule, because that person will be always on the defensive. You can constantly go out and attack, and that individual always has to justify why they're doing what they're doing. Now it looks like we got a little more time. I'm going to talk about rule number 5. Rule number 5, ridicule. Ridicule is a man's most potent weapon. There is no defense. It is almost impossible to counterattack ridicule. It also infuriates the opposition, who then react to your advantage. So what is ridicule? What does it mean to be ridiculed? To mock, taunt, imply making a game of a person. Usually it's unkind. To ridicule is to make fun of, either good-humoredly or unkindly, but with the intention of humiliating. To ridicule is to humiliate. We've used terms, and I keep on saying it, and I talk about the term enemy. We talk about the term now is to ridicule, to mock somebody. This is somebody, and when you're looking at the world of politics and governance, and looking after the people that elected you into power, you're supposed to represent a voice in the community, and that's what democracy is all about, is to represent. Democracy has changed so much along the way, and we'll discuss about how democracy's changed from the Athenians that came up with the idea to what it is currently in the Republic of the United States. Democracies throughout the world aren't really what they were designed to do. It's changed, manifested in a way. But when you look at arguments, you'll always see liberal Democrats and even Republicans start to do it now. Conservatives will ridicule their opposition, mock them, make fun of them. We talked about Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau with his water box thing, which people did make fun of. But Barack Obama made fun of Donald Trump in 2011 and one of his White House speeches where he talked about his birth records in Hawaii. Donald Trump was one of the people that were talking about the birth certificate and that Barack Obama was an American and he was born in Kenya, and the anti-birther movement that happened. But in that speech that was at the White House, which you can find on CNN, it's on YouTube, it's readily available, Barack Obama says that he's going to bring out his birth records, and he was happy to release them, and the state of Hawaii did release them. But he went on to say and call out in the crowd Donald Trump, and said that he was releasing his birth video, the moment of his birth from 50 years ago. And on the screens that played in the convention hall was a scene from The Lion King, where Mufasa holds up his baby, Simba, and they play that majestic music, and there he is, the birth of the new Lion King, the new order, the rightful king of the jungle. And in that room of hundreds of people, Barack Obama, President Obama, was able to ridicule his opponent, who would later become the President of the United States, a Republican. But if you watch that clip, you'll see everyone laughing and having a good time, but you'll see Trump sitting stone-faced. Because when you're the subject of ridicule, there is no defense, and it's impossible to counter-attack ridicule. And you can see in his face the frustration and how infuriated he was to be mocked in a room of his peers. And I challenge anyone to, in any given day, is to use ridicule. If you use ridicule against anybody, you'll see how it infuriates somebody And there is no way to come back, and any guy will know about that, and any man has always been the subject of ridicule. It's what guys do. It's in our nature. We pick on the weak. Because when you mock somebody, you don't see them as a threat. And when you call that person out in society and you call them out in politics, you can't use violence. You can't walk over and punch that guy in the face. And that's what would happen in a schoolyard. You're not allowed to do that. Society has rules and politics has rules, and anyone that would punch another politician would find themselves out of work and never working in public service again. So by using ridicule is a way to make your opponent weak. These are all tactics that the Democrats and the liberals use. We'll always come back to these rules because these rules are the foundation of everything that society is built on today. So I want to take a moment and say thank you very much for tuning in again. So we're covering off quite a few of these. Rules for radicals. Remember, number 3, whenever possible, go outside the expertise of your enemy. Number 4, make the enemy live up to its own book of rules. And number 5, ridicule is a man's most potent weapon. There is no defense. It is almost impossible to counterattack ridicule. Also, it infuriates the opposition, who then react to your advantage. When you get emotional in an argument, a discussion, a conversation, that moment, you've lost. Keep a cool head and don't react. But again, thanks for listening and tuning in. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you here. And we'll see you all next time on The Fact Is with Hollis Grant.